Welcome to Dr Joe Unplugged. This podcast contains general information and is not in any way medical advice. I guess my great pleasure today to welcome back Dr. Brian Walker. Brian, lovely to see you again.
Great to be back.
Thanks for coming in. So I thought today we might delve a little bit deeper into a couple of issues that we touched upon last time. And probably first up, and this will lead us down a couple of paths as we were talking about before we went live, is your legislation that is before the upper house here in WA. Tell us a little bit about that and how it's looking and what the prospects might be, and particularly what you're hoping to achieve with it.
Well, we know the bill is not going to get forward because although most of the politicians in the upper house actually agree with it, they don't dare say so.
Right.
So what we want to achieve is actually setting out a reasonably good, well thought out, well crafted piece of legislation which could be used as a model for the next people to bring that forward, maybe us in the next parliament. We're setting out the ground rules and we're making very, very clear a number of important points. The first is that by legalizing cannabis, we're actually protecting young people and vulnerable people. That has to be made there. We are giving protection to society. Mm. And the second one is that we're recognizing that what we're wanting to do is to open up the discussion about a healthy healing plant, which is very useful in a wide variety of diseases, which has so far not been put out, has not been educating doctors about, has not achieved much headway in medical society and is languishing as a kind of, it must be a drug, the drug seekers seeking it. And we're missing out on an important aspect of wellness. Mm. And so we want just to bring out that this is there, it's safe and regulated. We're actually able to keep society safe and ensure that standards are met.
Okay. When you say protecting the public, is that from sort of the criminal element, from unregulated products? Are there analogies with prohibition in the US in the 1920s with moonshine versus the alcohol model that we have now, which is a regulated system? You need ID, you have to be over 18, there's manufacturing standards. Is that what you think when you're thinking about when you're saying protection, or a bit deeper than that?
It is a bit deeper, actually. When it comes to protection, I mean, you and I could go out to the bar for a beer tonight, or we could brew our own beer at home. Now, the stuff I can buy in the bar is a lot better than the beer I could brew, but most people would actually choose not to make their own beer. The same is true of cannabis. You could grow your own cannabis in the backyard. It would be cheaper than that you can get elsewhere, I would imagine, but the quality may not be as good. Because one thing the government does do is ensure standards are there, and therefore the professionally proper cannabis is a lot cleaner, a lot safer, it's a lot more user-friendly, if you like. Not to say that you shouldn't grow your own cannabis, just that there's better choices if the government is actually taking care of that, with professional growing standards and in good quality. The children that currently the criminals can freely approach and offer cannabis, and it's quite a sexy thing to do because it's illegal, therefore I'm going to break the rules. We were all young once.
Yep.
And so that is going to be less evident because cannabis is now going to be open. People use this quite freely. And therefore the children are going to say, well, there's nothing sexy about this, we'll try something else. And also, the criminals just now have got free rein. They can influence children to use cannabis, but they can also say, and while you're there, try some of this. Because once you bring people together into the criminal fraternity, then other criminal things are easily happening. For example, methamphetamine, the scourge of our society, or other major drugs, which you really don't want children or anyone to have access to. And if you allow people to fraternize with criminals, you're going to get this. So we want to ban that. Now, in the US, for example, there's a black market there, and there's legal cannabis. And the black market is gradually losing its position, but it's still there.
Right.
So we need to be aware that we need to actually really support legally grown cannabis and not to allow criminals to profit from their current business.
And alcohol probably remains a good example. There's very little bootleg alcohol in this country. It maybe exists somewhere, and people are allowed to brew their own, as you say, unless you're a really aficionado, and there are a few of those, and they get good at it. Most people would prefer to have a product that somebody else has made, but there's not like we don't have the alcohol stills like they had in 20s USA.
Not in the large amounts they had then, and the vats of heavy alcohol that they were transporting. But even now, you can have your own still and make your own fairly strong spirits. You can do that. And you've got flavourings to put it in so it doesn't taste quite as bad.
But that's typically for your and your friends' consumption, not for market.
Not for
I
market.
don't think anybody's, maybe somebody is, but I don't think there's a thriving black market in alcohol. That was really the point
But
I
there
was
is a
more making.
thriving black market for tobacco.
Yes, and vapes, yes.
Well, yes, we can talk about that as well.
Yeah.
But so the homegrown cannabis, if you're an aficionado and you like to use good techniques for growing it, you're going to have clean, healthy herb there, which you can then use for cooking, for example. There's lots of good recipes for using cannabis and using it as a medicine. Fantastic, you can do that. And that would be one good reason for having your own cannabis at home.
Mm-hmm. A little bit like in a different way. It's not perfectly analogous, so don't jump up and down at home, but people can grow their own lemons or their own parsley or other herbs for their own cooking use.
Absolutely, and cannabis as a food is actually really good. My favourite example, for example, is using the cannabis leaf. Using 4 of those in your green smoothie rather than kale is a great treatment for COVID.
Okay. Oh,
It's been shown that the spike protein will not enter the cell if you have cannabinoids in your system.
Okay.
Can you imagine the benefits to people in their wellness program with COVID flying around? Why not?
Yeah. Wouldn't have been good for the business of certain companies we won't name, but that's another story altogether.
I'm sure you wouldn't imply anything like that, would you?
You mentioned North America. Have you looked in putting up the legislation? Have you looked at the experience in Canada, where I suppose they've legalised cannabis at a federal level, whereas in the United States there's different laws in different states. I think 24 have now legalised recreation. I don't like the term, but it's one that's used recreational use, whereas others haven't. But federally, there's there's not legalised. But in Canada, it's been done federally. Have you been able to look to their experience in terms of what's worked and maybe what hasn't worked?
Yes, actually, Canada's a good example because a lot there hasn't worked. And so what we're seeing there is actually the need to review the system to ensure that they're getting good access to cannabis, which is actually of a medical grade quality. I mean, if you're using cannabis to be recreationally, having it rather than a 6-pack of beer, by all means. But there's a lot to be learned from what shouldn't have happened in Canada. Okay. In America, fascinating again. I mean, they've shown very clearly that the revenues generated at the state level would allow you to build a hospital, or it really is a boon to the politicians that they can build things which they couldn't have done with the taxes. And that's a great thing as well. But I was listening to Alistair Vickery, Professor Vickery, the other day there, who was fascinating talk about the wonderful research that he was doing until recently. And that was solid, good evidence. But then he said, but the evidence we're getting from the US, you can forget, because the quality of the evidence is actually really miserable. They haven't got the quality high-grade cohort studies. And so all the information we're getting from the States, you've got to look at it with a bit of pinch of salt, because it's not that high of a quality, which is sad. We have to create that here in this country.
Well, certainly in the United States, as I understand, a lot of the research was based on cannabis that had been grown by some government department somewhere, and as you would imagine, it had all the quality that you would expect from a government department. Whereas here we have predominantly, certainly with Australian-produced cannabis, GMP certified cannabis, and so the trials that we have done here and we are doing here will demonstrate, yes, this product, this is how many milligrams it's got, this is how many milligrams of another cannabinoid it's got, and these are the results.
Very much so. And also the fascinating, at the cutting edge of the prescribers, is we're seeing the cutting edge of the science of cannabis. For example, the different ways we can use cannabis specifically for, let's say, autism in children, ADHD, looking here at, for example, how do you manage degenerative brain diseases with cannabis? Fascinating, and looking at the different terpene combinations and the understanding that it's not just one plant cannabis, there's a wide variety of ingredients which have, in different proportions, have different effects. And how do you use that professionally, properly as a prescribing doctor. Look, if you're having the cannabis after work for relaxation, by all means. But even then, some of them will get you a bit active and others will settle you down. And if you take the wrong one, you can't sleep as well.
Yeah.
So we need to be careful about how we use cannabis.
So I take your point, given the way the current parliament is configured. If the government has the numbers in both houses, you're not likely to get up. But and from my limited understanding of parliamentary issues, once the parliament finishes, then everything ends. Nothing carries forward into the next parliament. But are you then in a position to, I suppose, dust off what you've done, change it a little bit? It probably has to be reintroduced and start the process again. But the actual basis of the legislation that you've drafted, could that then be used as not a springboard, but I suppose reworked a little bit for the next parliament where, look, let's face it, you may, hope you do, but may hold the balance of power.
Oh, that's certainly a possibility, but there's actually two things going on. One is the THC driving laws, which I think is going to be passed. The only question is, when will the government decide to rectify the issue of a lie being enshrined in law? That's one thing. That will happen.
Yeah, now that's really important, and we were talking about this off air, and it was something that I was not aware of, that the tests that are done that we're told detect THC, which can be psychoactive, and anybody who's impaired shouldn't be driving or operating machinery, we know that. But the tests aren't actually for THC. Tell us a bit about that.
Like every substance coming into our body, they are metabolized to be excreted. And this is the way that, for example, if you take a poison, which is not going to kill you unless you take a large amount of it, the body's got to process it. And it's either excreted through the liver or through the kidneys, and it's processed in a number of steps from the original compound into the final metabolite, and then it's excreted. Now, it's biochemically preordained, if you like. Now, cannabis, there's a lot of ingredients there, but the THC in particular is metabolized. And what they're actually measuring in the urine in particular is not THC, but it's a metabolite of THC. It's THC with a COOH at the end of it. Now, that has zero psychoactive effect. Zero.
Right.
And it persists for a long time in the body because of the nature it's fat soluble. So when, after 5 weeks later, after your last cannabis use, it's still testing positive, therefore you are impaired, that is completely scientifically wrong. In fact, the following day after using cannabis and you test positive, that metabolite does not tell you you've got impairment because it's not psychoactive at all.
So the THC or other cannabinoids have come into the body, they've done what they've done, they've had their effect, and then the body, as you said, metabolizes it. For people not familiar with the term, like the body transforms it into something else ready to be gotten rid of. I mean, the most obvious thing is you chew your food, and when it comes out the other end, it doesn't look quite the same as how it went in. That might be an example.
Depends who's cooking, mind you.
So it's been changed, but in particular, it is changed to an inert form. So if you consumed this other form, the THC with the COOH molecules on the end of it, it would not have any effect on you in terms of any psychoactivity.
Zero.
But so something that is not psychoactive, that has no ability to impair you, is what they're actually measuring.
Indeed. And this is the travesty. I mean, if you follow the science, then you wouldn't do this test at all. What we're needing, and this is what we've said time and time again, we absolutely agree with the thought that no one should drive when impaired. And then we say, but the current legislation is such that people are allowed to drive impaired, say with alcohol, at the legal level of, say, 0.048, you've got a 300% risk of an accident. And then we're okay with that. And if you do drive with acute intoxication with THC, you've got a 1.5 or 2 times risk of an accident. I'm not saying you should, but there we are. If we treated cannabis like every other prescribed drug, the words are, if you feel impaired, don't drive.
Yeah. I mean, this applies to a whole lot of pain medications, even over-the-counter antihistamines for allergies. Some people there are non-sedating ones, but people can get sedated by the non-sedating ones, and some people can go a little bit spacey with antihistamines. You don't even need a prescription for them, and they're not even tested for. All right, so that leads to the next obvious question, which is why do they test? Well, not so much why do they test for this inert molecule, So I suppose that is part of the question, but ultimately, what is that a reflection of? And the aims of these laws, the existing laws, that is.
The testing has been there for some time, and up until fairly recently, and improperly, cannabis was actually banned as a dangerous drug. It's even called a narcotic when it's absolutely not. But there we are. So they used this as a test to determine who had taken cannabis in the first place, because if you've taken cannabis, it's an illicit drug, therefore you are a criminal. And so after the laws were changed, they didn't have any other different testing. All they can say is, you have used cannabis. Yes. Was it recreational? Was it actually medicinal? They can't tell the difference. And so there's this blanket ban on cannabis as being a dangerous drug, which is not. And they've kept the old testing. So what they're testing for is, have you used cannabis? Therefore, you might be using other drugs. Therefore, we can raid your home now to see where you're growing your cannabis.
So it is in no way a test of impairment.
No.
It is a effective, well, I mean a legal test, but a test to determine, have you used cannabis? And this dates, these laws date from a time when to use cannabis in any way was illegal. So therefore, it's a drug law enforcement mechanism, not a safety test.
Absolutely. It's a drug to help the police know who has used cannabis, so we can then raid their homes to see if they've got any cannabis plants. That's what they're doing it for.
Right. Do we have potential technology? And I have read a little bit from Canada, some work looking at trying to deter, a little bit like with alcohol, there is an impairment level, 0.05 is where it's deemed. And again, there's no one size fits all. So some people probably, and obviously you shouldn't do this, but probably some people at 0.06 are better able to drive than some people at 0.03, because no two people are identical. And I've seen some work that suggests that there's a level of THC at 5 nanograms per milliliter that seems to correlate with impairment, and below that, which you'd expect with any psychoactive substance, whether it's alcohol, whether it's pain medications, antidepressants. There's going to be some level where it's going to affect people. So above that level, problem; below that level, you're okay. Do you, as part of your legislation, are you looking at trying to change what is actually tested for?
No, what we're looking for is testing for impairment. We'll come to legislation we're putting in a bit later, if you like, but specifically THC in driving, that 5 level you've got there actually isn't true, because what they've undoubtedly shown time and time again internationally is that there is no level at which you can say that means impairment.
True.
So the real question is, for someone who's THC naive, if you have that level, you may be impaired, may not. Other people who are well adapted to THC may have a much higher level and not be impaired. So the question remains, are we testing for impairment? And we do have tests available, and they're coming onto the market now, where you can actually, much like set up a system where you are driving and the way your eyes are following what's going on would give an indication as to whether you are impaired, whether you've taken alcohol, whether you've taken methamphetamine, or whether you're sleep impaired.
Substance agnostic, it's how whatever you've used is affecting you.
Sleep impaired would do that as well. So what we're then seeing is that we're getting real impairment, real danger on the road is being detected, irrespective of what else is going on.
Okay. So I suppose the parallel with this in terms of the road is also the workplace testing. And that's yes, I know. And I think I've had personal experience with a couple of patients who've effectively been told, you either stop the medication which is helping you, we don't care whether it's helping you or not. Apparently there's no evidence according to the Oc Health people. But the fact that the person's better is, who cares about that? Either your job or your medication. Again, based on similar testing, that it's this inert substance that they're testing for.
Well, it's medical ignorance, it's fear-led, or covering your backside led, if you like, and it's just barbaric. There's no reason for that legislation to go on, that regulation to go on the part of the 5-4 companies. What we're needing to ensure is that people going on site where dangerous things are happening, dangerous machinery is being used, we need to ensure that people are not impaired.
As you said before, on the roads, we don't want people who are impaired for whatever reason.
Just so. The tests you're using do not check for impairment. So the fact that you're using them tells me that you don't actually care about the impairment. And so what we have is people coming on site who are actually impaired because they've done other things, say taking methamphetamine, it's cleared the system, they go on, they're sleep impaired, and they actually are a risk to others. And there's anecdotal evidence from a lot of my patients who have seen this on site and saying there are people there who are definitely a danger to us when they come back on shift until they settle down from their excesses when they were off duty. And they are allowed on site.
Yeah. And that in turn is also, in my opinion, a byproduct of bad policy because, yes, it is test for substance. If somebody is on the weekend using cannabis, as we know, it may show up days later. If somebody's used methamphetamine, it will be out of your system typically within 24, maybe 36 hours, so it doesn't show up. And that's one of the reasons why Perth is, I don't want to use the term, but they always talk about the XXX capital, and everybody seems to be in some competition to be it. I don't know why. But it is a function of bad policy that not forces, but essentially creates incentives for people to use substances that get out of their system more quickly, even though, to be honest, I'd much rather chat with somebody in Northbridge who's been on cannabis than who's been on methamphetamine, because I know who's more likely to try to punch my lights out.
Oh, very much so. We've got societal degradation because of this idiocy in policy, and it's hurting everybody. I mean, there's not a single person in our state who's not going to be affected by this idiocy at some stage.
Mm. I mean, I remember back in, this is diverting a little bit, I remember back in the 70s, you virtually didn't have these one-punch assaults, because if you were drunk and you had some sort of barroom brawl, which is, it's not good, but it happened. If you're drunk and you try to hit somebody, you've got a reasonable chance of not connecting and actually sort of swinging around and falling on the ground. But if you do connect, you're probably not going to hit. You might, depending on your strength, probably not going to hit them that hard. Not methamphetamine in your system, you're going to hit and you're going to connect, and that person may well go down and may not get up again. And this is what we see with the one-punch assaults. Again, a byproduct of these policies.
The same thing in ED. If you've got someone on methamphetamine coming in and just going completely off their trolley, it's very difficult to keep them down because they've got double or triple the strength. The methamphetamine turns them into brutes. Yeah. And it's horrible. Now, what we're actually seeing here is because of policy, and there's a larger question here as well, the degradation of society. We're all seeing it, the increasing violence, the loss of respect for authority, for the police, if you like, may be justifiable. That's what's happening, and we could argue that case, but what we're seeing is a society which is becoming gradually more unhinged. And I would think that part of it is due to the fact that we're actually, this is politicians doing this, we are actually putting in place laws which don't serve the people. And the people at some stage are going to say, we're sick of this. We don't want this. This is not who we are. So,
look, I think that's true. And I think we're seeing a couple of sort of, I don't know what the word is, green shoots or sparks, but you just see that around the world in a few different ways and places. But to get back to the different companies, and particularly the bigger FIFO companies, I do understand that the doctors who work with them aren't necessarily in the cannabis space and might not know a lot about it, but more importantly don't want to stick their necks out because they can fall back on, well, the government says it's this dangerous substance, so who are we to form a different view? And certainly big companies also are very, very risk averse. And again, I understand that, and so therefore it's much easier to just follow the party line, which in turn puts the onus back on government to actually come up with logical, science-based, evidence-based guidelines so these companies can say, well, yes, we're doing this. The government has sort of indicated, and look, I'm not necessarily saying what the government says is always right, and as we've seen, it's often quite wrong, but I think in a space like this, everybody, but particularly big companies, are going to look to government to say, we've commissioned the research and evidence, this is what we found, it is actually backed by science. Therefore, they can then treat their employees with the respect that they deserve.
I think you're assuming, first of all, that the government pays attention to science. It obviously doesn't.
I know.
And truth features not a bit in government unless it supports your point of view. It's the perception of truth which is important. So what's the worst sentence you can hear? I'm from the government, I'm here to help.
Yeah.
That doesn't fly.
Yeah.
And the doctors, I think it's up to the doctors to stand up and do what is right for their patients. We should be serving our patients. I went into the profession to serve, even at the detriment of my own well-being. We've all done this. We've actually gone the extra mile because we serve the people, because we've got a screw loose. We work our backsides off to help people who don't really want to be helped. Give us another pill, and I'll carry on my way. We know that. So what we need to be doing as a profession is standing up and demanding that we actually follow science. Now, the endocannabinoid system has been known since 1996. It still is not taught in any medical school that I have heard of. So the doctors since 1996, given the opportunity, have not had the chance of learning about an important part of our biochemistry. How can they then know how cannabis works? They can't.
Yeah.
So these doctors are now advising companies, in the absence of any scientific information, biased by the prejudices of 90 years, supported by a government which doesn't follow the science. How can we expect them to stand up and actually give an honest, straightforward scientific answer, especially when the company that's employed them doesn't want to hear what they're saying?
Look, there is that aspect too. And I think you're right, Innes, but also, look, I think with doctors, possibly always the case, but even more so now, look, you do end up getting indoctrinated by these professors in academia who think they're very smart because they've got a couple of letters in front of their name, and you basically get through your medical career by regurgitation of what you've been told. Original thought is not welcomed in medicine. And as we've seen historically, people like, Semmelweis and closer to home, Barry Marshall, you want to suggest something that goes against the current narrative, as against the current actual science, the current narrative. You're not going to have too many mates. In fact, worse than that, they're going to come for it. And we saw that with The Thing a few years ago. I mean, listening to a podcast with Martin Kulldorff from Harvard, who lost his job for suggesting that lockdowns don't work. And obviously he and Jay Bhattacharya and I can't remember the first name of the third doctor, Gupta, with the Barrington Declaration, essentially were completely vindicated by what turned out. And there were a few other voices saying at the time, but you get struck off.
Isn't that just remarkable? Look, we have learned not to think outside the box, to follow the rules. Look, the doctors nowadays, you need the straight A's to get into medical school. You only get straight A's by listening to the teacher, regurgitating there, and not questioning, because you don't get the A's in that case. So there we go. Into university, and it's a pharma-led industry there, and do what you're told. Anything outside the box, don't pay attention. They are the black sheep. Stick with this. Otherwise, you get trouble. And so our whole career is actually predicated upon the fact of obediently following those who know better. Why? Because we need to keep our patients safe. Anything outside that, we're putting our patients at risk. I can see the point. But let me tell you a story. My personal history, many years ago, I had a patient, this is in Germany, a woman freshly delivered of a baby with a lesion on her lung. It looked like TB on the X-ray report. So she was treated for TB. Okay? And isolated, of course. And her baby, her 2-month-old baby, was outside, couldn't be shown to her because it's through the window, because TB, of course. And so we did the Tyne test, the Montu test. We got the salivary swabbings. We got the stomach washings, sputum. Nothing. No evidence of acid-fast bacilli over the 2 weeks. The consultant was going to send her off to a mandated TB sanatorium.
Right.
Okay, for 6 months to be treated for TB. Not one single evidence, apart from an X-ray which suggested TB. I, young and foolish as I was, presented him with 5 differential diagnoses. Coccidioidomycosis, histiocytosis X, and also atypical pneumonia. It was atypical pneumonia. Okay, so treated with 2 antibiotics, and she was fine, off she went home. That consultant didn't want to know a bar of me after that.
No, because you've shown him up. And the last thing you want to do is show up those who regard themselves as your betters.
So better leave the place. That's my setup in general practice.
Yeah.
Leave the place because there's just too much hassle there. The amount of crap I got was just unbelievable. No. Even now, in society now, doing the job that we do, when we have a different point of view, let's take, for example, the COVID vaccines. Show me the evidence. I asked the Chief Health Officer for the evidence that he was giving to the government, and do you know what he said to me? He says, cabinet in confidence. I can't tell you that. So he advised the government based on evidence that the pharma companies had given him, which was falsified.
Well, I think in America, the FDA wanted to lock up the information from Pfizer for 75 years. I think that's been challenged and actually now has come out. And I think there is a book coming out called The Pfizer Papers, which is going to lift the lid on some of this. But again, it goes to that fundamental question. If an individual patient comes into a practice to see you or me or any other doctor, they can request their medical information under freedom of information, and it all has to be given to them. And they are entitled to know the side effects, the basis of what's being recommended, and have a choice. And all of a sudden, we're administering something to everybody across the board, and the government is saying, even the health officers are saying you have to have, well, can you explain to us, why? Can you show us the evidence? Oh, no.
Well, now let's look at the medical board, which has the complete control over us as doctors, well, all health practitioners. We're going to be passing a law soon, I can't stop it, which is going to make WA align with the rest of Australia, giving APRA entire control as a unified control. Okay, so all the states are going to be the same.
So this will include mandatory reporting like in the other states?
Now, first of all, which parliamentary body has supervision over APRA?
That's a good question. I assume they sit somewhere under the health department, but I don't know exactly where.
There's no committee which actually holds APRA accountable. Who holds APRA accountable? Well, the health ministers. Health ministers who aren't medically qualified and don't know what they're talking about. They're advised by health bureaucrats who don't want to rock that boat because they're the Semmelweis type there, keep things where they are, who may be giving advice by the pharma companies, which is not in alignment, which may be guided by TGA, which is 96% pharma-owned. And now we're asking, so these people, and also, you and I have probably experienced this. At a hospital or a facility, in comes a politician who wants to inspect the area. What then happens is that the nurses and the other doctors are told, do not say a word. They come in, there's a senior health bureaucrat from whichever organisation, WACS in this case, when I was in the region, and they give the answers. The staff or the hospital who want to give the true answers are actually muzzled. They're not allowed to tell the minister the truth. So these ministers now, or their advisors, go back to give the information from someone who's actually put forward falsities, or they've withheld half of the truth. So the APRA is now monitored by people who don't know what's going on and are being fed information which doesn't reflect the truth at the ground level. And that's the body now, which then says to us, something new is coming in, doctors should not question. In fact, the law now states that we as doctors must give the government line, failing which we can be struck off.
Yeah.
Which means that the very foundation of science is the asking a question. So the foundation of science is banned.
Yeah, because as soon as you can't ask a question, it's deemed that everything is known and there can't be anything else to know.
The science is fixed.
Exactly.
And it is not.
It's never fixed. It can't. By nature, science is actually a process of inquiry. That's what it is. It's not a belief system. It's a process of inquiry, with the starting position being, I don't actually know, I need to find out, or what I currently believe is wrong and needs to be proved to be correct.
Yes, I need to assume this is wrong until I've proved it right, but the next time I'll do the same thing again. Did you know, for example, that this is my favourite example, the treatment for asthma in the 1920s was to give the patient a tobacco cigarette laced with a bit of strychnine.
Strychnine.
Well, you can see the physiology of that, the pharmacology. I mean, that would certainly reduce the secretions if you didn't take too much. But that was a treatment for asthma. Today, we'd be struck off with that, rightly so, because questions were asked. And now, I've got colleagues of mine who asked questions. They actually showed a patient a paper, a peer-reviewed paper about the COVID vaccine, because is it safe, doctor? Well, the government says so. Here's a paper suggesting opposite. They were struck off.
So essentially, if the government says penicillin, then whether you as an individual are allergic to penicillin or not won't matter. The government says you have to take penicillin.
And at the same time, the government also said, we can't be sued for this, and so with the mandates, who's actually holding that is the companies who actually insisted on following the government's instructions. They're the ones who are going to get the trouble, not the government who demanded it. We've got serious problems here.
We do. We've got to think of a more positive way to try and bring this to a...
There's an election coming up, and what I'm saying is this side and that side of the House, they're both as bad as each other.
They really do appear to be in lockstep. It's increasingly difficult, at least currently to tell the difference between the two sides. They sort of they argue a little bit at the edges, but it's almost like, remember the old Bugs Bunny, one of the Looney Tunes? There was Ralph and Sam, the coyote and the sheepdog, and they'd walk to work in the morning, they'd punch in, morning Sam, morning Ralph, and then they'd spend the whole day, the coyote trying to steal the sheep and the sheepdog trying to punch him out, and then the whistle blew at 5 o'clock and they'd walk off together. And it's all just for show. And I sort of get the feeling with politics at the moment between the major parties, it's also, we've got to argue about something because it's show for the public, but really there are differences, but the differences are slight.
Look, if you look at any party, they've got a spectrum of beliefs, factions or wings, if you like, and there's an overlap. So it's all one. And when you vote for the established parties, you're basically getting more of the same. If you want things to carry on the way they are, vote the way you've been voting. I am saying, don't trust any of them. Okay, go for something new. Because, look, the innovation we need innovation. We've got civil servants, highly paid civil servants, whose only function is to keep the status quo. Look at Yes Minister or the Utopia. That's exactly right. Don't make changes. Keep it in the past.
Well, I mean, the status quo serves the interests that orchestrate it and organise it. And I can't remember who said it the other day. I think it was on one of the Substack posts, said, go back to Abraham Lincoln, government of the people, by the people, for the people, is now government of the bureaucrats, by the bureaucrats, for the bureaucrats. So all of this serves the interests of the bureaucrats and, some of the politicians, although politicians can at least lose their seats, whereas bureaucrats can't be fired. So it's all about them. It's not about the people.
Our system is no longer fit for purpose. And I say that as someone who's on the inside. Our system is not fit for purpose.
So... I suppose I look across the Tasman to New Zealand. Obviously, they had a change of government last year, and yes, from one side to the other. But what I find interesting is the two parties, ACT and New Zealand First, that have come into a coalition, and they sort of have the three now who are not. Obviously they formed a coalition. They're sort of not absolutely natural bedfellows, but the two minor parties, and they don't see eye to eye on everything either, but the two minor parties are putting a bit of spine into the major party to say, these are the changes that our people want. These are the other ones, these are the changes our people want. And it appears that they're trying to undo some of the damage that's been wrought upon New Zealand over the previous 6 years.
Well, as a practicing general practitioner, I'm seeing in the clinic where I work, I'm seeing societal collapse. I'm seeing a decay. And if we carry on the same pathway, we're going to get more of that. It's just worsening. We need a change. We need innovative thinking. We need the courage to recognise that we need new thinking. Old thinking is not going to serve us.
So if we can have some independents and minor parties, smaller perhaps parties, not minor, smaller parties, particularly in upper houses, and it's not just in WA, this is right across the board, then that in turn can influence the bigger parties to say, I think last time the federal government got with 32% of the vote. That's less than 1 in 3. The opposition also got about 1 in 3. So another 1 in 3 is saying, I don't want either of you, we want something else.
It's about that, yes. So what we're actually getting is two-party preferred basically means that just over 1/3 of the country is represented at that time. There's no way that's a democracy. We ought to be looking here at preferential voting to get an idea. If not this one here, maybe this one here would mirror my views more accurately. So we get a representative view of the people. What do the people want? And also we need different politicians. When you come into Parliament, you need to swear an oath to serve the people. How is it that after you've sworn that oath, you don't serve the people? You need to actually believe, I'm taking an oath and I'm going to keep that. I serve the people. It's a basic and it's not being followed.
Yeah, sort of ancient, but equally in these times, novel concept.
Old-fashioned?
Yeah, but look, it's also, I suppose, there are inflection points and turning points that we can only ever identify in the rear view mirror, not going forwards. But
we're
at some
one
point,
now.
Yeah, at some point, the current system, if it continues down this path, and it's not fit for purpose, then somehow it change happens almost not because anybody's planned it, but because it happens because essentially the people eventually will bring it about.
Well, the good news is that out there, the people are actually saying this is no longer good enough. So the dyed in the wool, got to vote this way. People are beginning to say, hang about, this is not giving us what we need. This is not serving us.
Yeah.
And so we're getting to the stage where people are beginning to say, let's choose something different. The Teals last time in federal parliament, look at our legalised cannabis. I was speaking to a reporter just recently, and I said, why do you think we're a single-issue party? Haven't you been reading all the things that I've been speaking about, all the different topics I've been speaking about? He says, oh, really? He says, the media doesn't have a clue about this. And so the people out there who are basically using the media to get the information are being uninformed.
Well, that's the other, I suppose, issue in society with a lot of the mainstream media rely on government, both for advertising and also to get fed information, which I think also sees increasingly people turning to independent journalists, things like Public on Substack, the Free Press, people who are actually doing, dare I say it, real journalism and are not beholden to governments. But I suppose, again, to try and bring it back to change, and this also comes into the health system, that we need to move away from being essentially a disease system with hospitals as the temples of said disease system, because ultimately by the time you're at hospital, a functioning health system should not be measured by more hospital beds. A functioning health system should actually be measured by less hospital beds.
Joe, you are so correct about that. Wellness, physical, mental, social and financial wellness as defined by the World Health Organization is what we should be doing, and managing our wellness and keeping that as long as possible. And that starts with good food, it starts with good agriculture, it starts with a good society, housing, all these things which enable us to live well and to live to our full potential. This is what we should be aiming for.
And ultimately, most of that comes back to the individual, at an individual and family level, with the support of knowledge and information that can be provided to them, and the support of systems, but not dependent upon or reliant on systems.
Yes. Well, what I'm looking at here is smaller government, less regulations. I was looking at this last week.
You're sounding like a libertarian now, Brian, like me.
And so I am a libertarian, but you know that well. No, the idea is that the regulations we're putting in there, for example, the short stay accommodation.
Yeah.
And they've now decided that you have your house there, B&B or Airbnb. We're now going to make it a crime to do this, and penalties are $20,000. You can't do this and you can't do that. It was your home, and now we're telling you what you can do with it.
So guys, much for a man's home is his castle, eh?
Back off.
Yep.
Just let these rules and regulations stop it. We need a free society. I want to do what I want, when I want, how I want, provided no one else gets hurt.
So I'm not interfering with anybody else.
That's right.
And I'm living my life and respecting that you can also live your life not identically to me.
And when you come to a doctor looking for advice about your wellness, I should be able to tell you what would be serving you best. Now, what might serve this one best may not be what serves this one best. And this is why you come to a doctor who knows you in a health system which cares for you and helps you to decide that the food processing industry is making us all sick. Let's not do that.
So let's not make it harder for farmers. Let's encourage farmers.
And indeed, for the farming, let's look at our regenerative farming so we can get better yields from our ground. Let's stop doing the broad acreage farming to export that and look after our soil, because if we treat the soil well, it will treat us well. Oh. The fundamentals. I am a fundamentalist.
The basics, I think they go back to probably biblical times and before, probably back to the year dot. Always a pleasure to have you in the studio, Brian. Any final thoughts for the listeners today?
Yes, have hope. There are good people working on this and work with us, and we will change society, because I want to make this place a better place for my children and grandchildren. Stand with us and help us.
Brilliant, Brian. Thanks for listening to Dr. Joe Unplugged. If you enjoyed this podcast, please subscribe, like and share. You can also follow it on all the socials. There'll be new content uploaded each week.